Professor James Chin, welcome to my humble abode. I think you might be the first person to be in my home studio, so thank you for doing this. You are in town, and I think you've got a lot of meetings on your plate. You're a very busy person. I think today we're going to spend some time on East Malaysia and Sabah Sarawak specifically. Without that particular region, I think Malaysian politics is in a rather unstable position. So maybe you can start off by telling me what is the most pertinent thing to know about East Malaysia states right now?
Right. So the we start with the very basic of Malaysian politics. So Malaysian politics has always been understood to be Barisan Nasional type of politics, where the core party is actually UMNO, right? And UMNO calls the shots, plus the minor parties, Barisan Nasional, MCA, MIC, all the other parties, they add on to Barisan Nasional's strength collectively, right? So that model sort of fell apart. People say it's 2018. In fact, it's not. That model fell apart in 2008. So if you look at the election outcome in 2008, the first thing you notice is that, without the MPs for Sabah and Sarawak, UMNO will follow from power. So that's the reason why you notice that when Najib came in 2009, one of the things he did was that he made sure that the speaker and deputy speakers came from Sabah and Sarawak, and more importantly, he made sure that, we get this thing called Malaysia Day, which we get a public holiday. That was a recognition of the formation of Malaysia. So that was the time when everything changed. People suddenly realized that Sabah and Sarawak was, crucial to the political stability on this side. Because prior to 2008, right, it was always understood that Sabah and Sarawak was basically fixed deposit for the Barisan Nasional stroke UMNO, right? So that's where everything changes. So since then, the second thing is, of course, the big change was in 2018 when Barisan Nasional stroke UMNO fell out of power. Now, why was that another crucial time for Sabah and Sarawak? It was crucial because this allowed Sabahans and Sarawakians to break away from the Barisan model. So if you remember, on the night Barisan Nasional lost power, the most important thing is not so much that, Najib, was trying to stage a coup or whatever. The most important thing was Sarawak Barisan Nasional broke away and formed GPS, right? So that was crucial. This sent a very strong signal out that you guys can do whatever you want on the Malayan side, right? But you cannot, rely on us in Sabah just to follow along with no longer your fixed deposit. So that's the reason why politics today, right? No matter how you play the numbers game, you always have to look at Sabah and Sarawak, what's happening. So the trick in Malaysia, right, is actually not 112. People say that you need a majority to form government 112. Yes, but to get real political stability, you need 148. And to get the 148, right, you need the 50 plus seat for Sabah and Sarawak to provide the stability. Without the stability, yes, you can rule, but you cannot do a lot of things. So that's where Sabah and Sarawak comes in. And that's why Sabah and Sarawak is such a big deal nowadays. And it's very obvious. You speak to anybody in the political class here, they talk about MA63. But you and I both know, you've been in journalism for a very long time. You know, right? Prior to 2008, nobody mentioned MA63. In fact, if I mention MA63, you would ask me, what is it? Most people would not know it, right? Prior to that, in fact, 2008, prior to that, right, most people count the independence date for Malaysia as 1957. Only after the controversy over Malaysian agreement, right, people suddenly start realizing that you don't count from 57, you count from 63. That is the real date of the formation of Malaysia. So for all those reasons, right, Sabah and Sarawak is very important to the political stability of Malaysia going forward.
You've got the 50 plus seats that you say is the East Malaysian fixed deposit for the ruling coalition, but those 50 seats, they don't speak as one voice.
I'm talking about during the Barisan days.
Correct. Correct. For today, this era now, right? Halfway through the UMNO administration.
Yep.
How much of those 50 seats are still, in some sense, speaking as one voice? How fragmented are they, or otherwise?
The fragmentation is basically between Sabah and Sarawak. So on the Sarawak side, the block is actually quite solid. So on the Sarawak side, there's 31, 32 seats. So that is quite a solid block. It is in Sabah that you don't get a solid block. But having said that, there are certain issues where all the MPs, it doesn't matter which party you come from, will come together. Example of that is MA63. So that's the reason why the upcoming Sabah elections is quite crucial. Because what the Sabahans are trying to do under Hajiji is to create their version of GPS. So that's the reason why GRS wants to be a solid block like Sarawak. And if they do well in this coming state election, right, they're hoping to transfer that success to the next GE, which UMNO has to call in 2 years' time.
So right now, what are the biggest factors for Sabah electorate? What are the most important things for them to think about?
Right. So in terms of Sabah politics, it's always fixated on personalities. And after a personality is basically what we call money politics, resources is very, very important. So in terms of personality, if you look at Sabah, right, political parties labeling is not really important, except maybe urban areas where the rocket is a very, very strong symbol. Other than that, I would argue that most of the other symbols are not that important. The second thing about Sabah politics is crucially important, right? There's this issue called PTI. PTI, for people who are unfamiliar, are basically illegal migrants, or today's world we call it undocumented migrants, mostly from Mindanao region, the Philippines and Indonesia. So those guys have gone to Sabah for many, many decades now. So if you look at the latest census figure, what is really interesting is that even the Malaysian government themselves acknowledge 1/3 of the Sabah population are formerly people who came in from outside. In other words, not born in Sabah. But if you speak to people who are working on the ground in Sabah, Sabah researchers, right, they will tell you that 50% of the population in Sabah are now people who were not born and raised in Sabah, in other words, coming from the outside. And that is really incredible. I mean, this is, if you want to use a very crude word, you can argue that the Sabah we see today, right, was not the Sabah you saw at the time of independence in 63, where the Kadazan Dusun majority were there. Now the Kadazan Dusun is basically a minority in Sabah. So Sabah is now a Muslim majority state. And basically, if you look at electoral politics, right, the native population that have lost their power or their balancing power.
So what does it mean in the upcoming Sabah elections?
So in the coming Sabah elections, like I said, what Hajiji, the current chief minister, wants is he wants to replicate the GPS model. So if you look at the Sarawak GPS model, right, GPS dominates local politics. So currently GPS in Sarawak, they have 82 state seats, right? They want Nanangari. GPS, the local ruling coalition, control 80 out of the seats. The only 2 other seats they don't control actually belong to DAP. So the idea is that you want to localize the politics, create a very parochial political culture. So in Sarawak, right, if you look at the 4 parties making up the GPS, right, what is unique about those 4 parties? The unique thing is that those 4 parties are not found outside Sarawak. They're basically Sarawak locally placed. So you don't find, SUPP in Peninsular Malaysia. They're not here. You don't find PPP in Malaya. There's no such thing as, you don't find them here at all. So these are very localized parochial party, which basically fight for the interests of the state. And this sort of model appears to be very, very popular in Sarawak. So that's the reason why on this side, right, people are a bit afraid, because they feel that if Sarawak keep going this way, right, we will never have a chance to go into Sarawak. So, for example, right, the parties of the All Barisan National, like MCA, UMNO, all these things, they have a big headache because they actually don't have any ground presence in Sarawak. They have a ground presence in Sabah. Previously, they didn't have it. But what people forget is that the only reason they went to Sabah is because the local champions in Sabah, which represents UMNO's interest, called USNO, turned against them. So in 1991, UMNO, MCA, all those guys jumped to Sabah. But that's because they had no choice. But in Sarawak, that never happened. So that is the major difference between Sabah and Sarawak. So coming back to your question, what do Sabahans want? Sabahans, at least the political elite, they want to replicate the GPS model where it's a local-based coalition, kick out all the other non-Sabahans party. That is what they want. But unfortunately, they can't do it in Sabah because it's around personalities. And Sabah election this time will be quite interesting because you got the specter of high-level corruption hanging over there. Anybody who follows Sabah politics can see that since last year, right, there are people releasing videos about high-level corruptions, YB getting cash hands up and all that sort of thing. And now they're trying to implicate the chief minister as well.
So forget what the political elites want. What about the people themselves? You talk about how Sabah is now 1/3, at least foreign sourced, right? And then you've got the rest of them who are local Sabahans. In general, what do they want? What do they want from the politics of the day?
Right. So basically, what do Sabahans want? What Sabahans want is very similar to what the rest of Malaysians want. They want political stability. they want economic prosperity, and they want a future for their children, right? These are the core values that everyone agrees on. But the problem is in Sabah, right? Because politics is around personalities, all these things cannot happen. So, for example, Sabah's economy has not been doing very well. Sabah is one of the poorest state in Malaysia, despite the fact that Sabah and Sarawak are the major oil and gas producers. And Sabah politics, right, they never had any real stability. Most people don't realize that Sabah since 63, right, has gone through about 20 chief ministers. I don't think a lot of people know about this. You know, they go to chief minister. It's also the only state where they try to experiment the top political position. Because during Mahathir's time, they had this thing called the rotational chief minister, which nobody talks about it today, right? That is where the three different voting blocks, Muslim Bumiputera, non-Muslim Bumiputera, and Chinese, each of them get a 2-year term as the chief minister, which is unique, but today's people have forgotten about it. I think one of the problems we have on the Malayan side is that people don't understand Sabah and Sarawak, and also people here have very, very short memories.
So now we're halfway through the Anwar government, right? You say we've got 2 years to go. And this East Malaysian bloc is so important. It's so important to Anwar for him to stay on the power, and of course for all the other parties as well. What can we hope to expect in terms of the voting behavior in the next national elections based on what you see now in East Malaysia?
Right. So that's a question that can only be answered for Sarawak. So for the Sarawak side, I expect GPS to still dominate in the next general election, and they will use it to get maximum concession with whoever the federal government is to resolve the MA63 historical grievances. In Sabah, everything will be dependent on the upcoming state election. It will be called definitely this year in the second half of this year. If GPS can get it right, which is they become dominant, in terms of domestic, local level, state level politics, then they can use that as a platform to dominate themselves at the federal election that's coming up.
So if you can give me three permutations, the most likely, average likelihood, and least likely, but most importantly, what does those permutations mean for Peninsular Malaysia in terms of how those those two events occur?
Sure. So the peninsula side, the most important thing is whether Anwar can hold the coalition together. Again, this goes back to my earlier point about people have short memory. People think that Anwar's the prime minister, he won the election. In fact, he didn't win the election last round. This government was basically entrusted him by the king who asked him to form the government. So next round, it will be quite interesting. So next round, rather than a three-way fight like the last general election where you got Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Harapan, and PN, next round will basically be PN versus Pakatan Harapan stroke UMNO, right? So if they cannot get a clear majority on this side of the South China Sea, then Sabah and Sarawak will play a very important role in picking whoever will eventually form the federal government, and whoever gets the 148 will have political stability. So for Anwar's side, right, the most important thing is that he's to handle this relationship with UMNO and Barisan Nasional, because they will have to share their seats in this coming election. For the Perikatan side, they only have one card to play, which is the political Islam card. So in the next round, right, I expect PAS to go all out and capture the Malay seats. So right now, what is really interesting about PAS is PAS has already broken out of the 4 classic core Malay states. So now they have to go down to the lower half of the Malayan states. If they can sweep through Malaya, right, Bersatu doesn't have to do very well, then they will get very close to 112. And if they can get, say, about 100, 105, right, it is very likely Sabah and Sarawak got no choice but to join with Perikatan.
Sounds very, very knife-edged lah, James.
Yeah, because Malaysian politics has changed. So nowadays, right, you can't plan for anything. Malaysian politics can change very fast. Within 48 hours, everything can change. This is what I mean, right? You need to look back, right? We haven't had political stability since 2018. The government fell in 2020 with Mahathir, and then 2 times later, another 2 prime minister, Ismail Sabri, all that came out after that, Muhyiddin Yassin. And even since then, you look at Anwar. Anwar was elected in 2022, towards the end of 2022, right? At the start of last year, some of your viewers may remember, right? In January of 2024, there was Lanka Dubai. There was another move to replace it. Only in the middle of the year, when there was infighting in Bersatu, where people shifted, And then the what they call the speaker said that I'm not going to apply the anti-hopping law. Only then he got his political stability in the last 6 months. So when people talk about political stability, they don't realize this is something that's very, very new. Only happened, we only had it for the last 6, 7 months. Prior to that, I'm not going to follow any time. So that's the reason why I always tell my friend in the Malaysian political class, right? You guys talk as if Anwar, is Anwar. And I'm telling people, the Anwar that you see now is not the real Anwar because he did not win a mandate in the last general election. He was given this task to form the government. If you want to know what Anwar is really, really like, you got to give him the mandate in the next general election. Then the sort of policy he come up with in the next government, assuming he wins, right? That is the real Anwar. The Anwar you see today is not the real Anwar. The Anwar you see today is the one trying to hold the coalition together and prepare the coalition to win the next general election.
What is the real Anwar like?
I don't know. I'm waiting to. Because nobody knows, right? Because without the mandate, you don't know. You can guess or sort of.
You guess that?
No, I prefer not to guess. This is too public.
Okay, give me the sanitized version.
There's no sanitized version for Anwar.
For someone like me, James, I don't give a crap about politics. I really, and at this point in my life, right, I've seen politicians since I started reporting nearly 30 years ago, right? They still do and say the same things. The same wine, different bottle, some of them are still the same personality, All I want them to do is get on with their bloody job, right? Stop fighting for power, stop fighting for money, and get on with their work. The rest of the world is going so fast and so far ahead of Malaysia, and they're still trying to topple each other. I'm really pissed off, and when are they going to change?
They cannot change because that is the structure of the federation. So because the structure, okay, let me go back through. So Malaysia was formed in a very interesting way. They built a very interesting structure in 57 when they first started, all right? The first thing that they create, which is unique around the world, which no other country has, are two things. One, you have a written constitution, but yet some of the powers of the constitution was restricted to this thing called conference of rulers, right, outside the constitution. Second thing that they did that was unique, no other country has done it, is that they tied an ethnic identity with a religious identity. It is defined, right? If you're a Malay person in Malaysia, it's defined in the constitution. That you must be a practicing Muslim, okay? So they tie that down, which means from day one, right, Malaysia has always practiced racial stroke identity politics. You can't run away from that, okay? Now, the second real restructuring of Malaysian politics occurred after 69, after the racial riots. Then Tun Razak had his idea about how to move the country forward. So that's the reason why in 1970, end of 73, 74, he created a thing called Barisan Nasional, create a completely new political structure. And we are living in the era of the political structure created by Razak, but modified extensively through the strongman Mahathir, who was in power for more than 20 years. Okay, so this structure is basically based on seeking power through race and religion, and it's a winner-take-all problem. Well, it's a problem where it's a winner-take-all system now. So when you say that you want politicians to get on with it and do the thing, bring the country forward, the answer is that it is not possible under the current system.
Well, they've amended the constitution hundreds of times already, right? Can't they amend this portion of the constitution?
No. For the core part of the constitution, right, you cannot amend because certain things like the Article 153, all those things, right, you need the Conference of Rulers assent to in order to change it. So it is not possible. So what happened during Mahathir era, right? He did two things. He amended the constitution to fit him, but more importantly, he changed the entire political structure, especially changes in the civil service, and created a political culture which we're still living in today.
So what can we expect in the next GE then? What can we expect?
Like I said, the next GE is all about two big coalitions, Anwar coalition.
Correct. I understand, right? So it's down to two different parties, right? What can we expect in terms of how either of the party narrate themselves, and will the people be more wise by then? Can they protest but just simply not voting, not turning up?
No. The thing is that Malaysians have short memories. But what is very clear to me is that in the next election, right, the only vote that is up for play is the Malay votes. The Malay votes will be still highly divisive, but like I said, PAS is going all out to capture the Malay votes, especially the lower half of the Malay Peninsula. For the Chinese vote, my argument is that it is still solidly behind Rocket, behind DAP. The other vote that can sort of play with are the Indian votes. The East Malaysian side, I don't think they can play. I don't think West Malaysian Party have any chance of capturing any of the votes in Sarawak. In Sabah, everything will be dependent on what happens in the upcoming state election. So basically, the bottom line is that the next government will be formed on whoever wins the Malay vote and who comes closest to the 112 before the Sabah Sarawak people will jump in.
So between Sabah, Sarawak is the bigger portion, lah, right? Right, with more contribution to the 50 seats in Parliament. Right?
Yes.
How do you think the Sarawak coalition, the Sarawak bloc, will align themselves? Who will they align with?
They will align whoever give them the most concession MSCC3 and also who give them the most political autonomy.
And who at this point in time will give them more?
At the present moment, like I said, things will change very fast. At the present moment, Anwar is willing to negotiate. But you got to remember, the only reason why Anwar is willing to negotiate is because he wants to win the next election. Because he doesn't want a situation where the royals will have to come in and decide who will form the government. Now, on the other side, the people they can negotiate with is, of course, Bersatu. But Bersatu currently, there's power struggle in there. Everybody understands that Muhyiddin may not hang on until the next general election. So it depends on who becomes the number one in Bersatu.
And then there's also this whole idea that MCA and MIC are possibly leaving Barisan, right? Does it even matter anymore?
Right. So there's a lot of talk about that. My argument is that MIC and MCA, this talk is to let off the steam. In reality, it's not possible for them to leave the Barisan national system because they cannot survive outside the ecosystem.
Okay, so with the two big needle movers seem to me to be firstly, the East Malaysian bloc, James. The second big needle mover is, of course, the PAS and the Malay vote. Do you think they will get the penetration in Peninsula that they want?
So if you look at the voting pattern of PAS from the general election plus the 6 states, right, they've strengthened by about 10 to 15%. That's based on my own calculation. But there's several weak spots. For example, they find it very difficult to take on Pahang, Malacca, Johor, all those places. If they manage to push all the way down, right, then we really seeing, that Perikatan will have a chance. Like I said, Perikatan collectively, right, must be able to hit around 100%, 100 seat mark. Then the Sabah and Sarawak will take them seriously. Now at the problem, now everyone is adopting this thing called wait and see attitude. You have to remember, right, there are lots of problems on the other side. That's the reason why Anwar is so strong now. He's strong not because he's strong, it's because the other side is in trouble. Bersatu, there's a huge power struggle between Azmi, Ali, and Hamzah. And on the PAS side, right, you have a big problem because Hadi Awan is not well. I mean, I'm not letting out a secret, everybody knows it. But what is funny, if you want me to tell a joke, right, the joke is that, Malaysia's fortune, right, is in the hands of 3 people who are all 77 years old. You know, right? You know about the joke, right?
Oh, go on then.
Yeah, well, the joke is that Anwar is 77. Who's this? Hadi Awan is 77. And the third major political figure is also 77 years old.
Who's the third political figure?
I can't remember. Just dropped my mind. You come back to me in a while.
A few months ago, I think she's from France, Sophie Lemieux on LinkedIn. She wrote an article which was carried in Channel News Asia about Malaysia's obsession with old leaders. And then she was right. We've got all these people in charge who are so old and they've been around for so long, and we still can't get rid of them, It's so distressing.
No, but the reason why you can't get rid of them because the politics in Malaysia is based on a patronage system. Right? If you sit on top of the tree,
Is there any way constitutionally that we just get rid of this bloody thing, James?
I think the closest change we can make, I mean, realistically with the numbers, the closest change we can make is the 2 terms maximum for Prime Minister. That one is doable under specific set of circumstances. But all the other things, I think, is a bit too hard. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because if you want to change the fundamentals of the Malaysian political system, right, you hit a brick wall called Islam. And once you hit the brick wall Islam, every discussion you have becomes irrational. So that's the reason why it is not possible. So for the non-Malay community here, I always tell them you have to work within the system and find a way around the system rather than try to use the current system to suit your needs, because that's not going to happen.
So for the business people and for the people at large, I think both factions want political stability, yeah, because otherwise they can't make decisions for the long term, whether for your family or whether for
Anyway, they're not interested in the long term, so they're only interested in the next election.
Okay, so those are the political parties. But for the people at large and the business community, right, we want stability, we want to have visibility,
Yes.
and we want to have some kind of framework. At least we know the rules, In the absence of that, what does that mean for us?
No, you have to understand, right? If you're in a business community, right, they actually basically don't kacau you too much. They will allow the economy to carry on. So basically, the way it works is this: as long as you don't kacau them in the political arena, they'll let you, they will leave you alone. The problem is you have to do it in such a way that you don't attract any attention. Because the moment you attract attention, right, then they'll politicize everything. This is the problem. And the problem is that sometimes you attract attention without knowing it. So example of that, right? Most people do not realize how successful KK Mark was, right? People see that all the time, but people didn't know how successful, how big it was. It's $1 billion ringgit business. People didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Only after the ham thing blew up, the socks thing blew up, then people look at it closely. So this is what I mean. You can still do business in Malaysia. Malaysia is still relatively easy to do business with. And this is the irony. Malaysia is one of those countries that's very highly regulated, right? Almost anything you want to do in Malaysia require licensing requirement. Almost anything. And this is straight, right? People say, how can you say Malaysia is easy to do business? The reason why it's easy to do business in Malaysia is because all these regulations are built in as a rank-seeking advice, right? So as long as you're willing to pay, no problem, you can jalan. It's a terrible thing to say.
The regulation is not because of anything else, but they just want to make money.
Yes, no, this is my point, right? So you asked me about certainty, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm a foreign investor, I come to Malaysia, right?
Yeah.
I know I can bribe my way through. That is certainty.
Yeah.
It's better for me than go to another third world country where everything is a discretion, even worse.
Yeah.
You see, this is the crazy stuff people don't understand.
So you actually you live in Tasmania in Australia, right?
Yes.
You have got the luxury of seeing Malaysia with this kind of like almost impartial third party lens, James. When you sit yourself in your study in Tasmania, and then also when you talk to the people around you, whether it's policymakers in government or whether fellow Malaysians in Australia or even Australians, right? How do they see Malaysia?
Most people around the world have a very, very positive view of Malaysia because they understand Malaysia is the Malaysia from the 60s to the 80s. So most people, right, don't know what the real Malaysia is. And also, if you are a typical foreigner, most of you will go to major areas like Kuala Lumpur or Penang. So you see everything is very nice. So even if I were to tell you Malaysia is becoming increasingly Islamic, right? They don't see, you go to pavilion, what Islam are you talking about? What political Islam are you talking about? You can drink beer from any part of the world, you can drink expensive wine, you can eat non-halal dishes anytime you want. So the world that the foreigners come to Malaysia, right? It is still the same Malaysia you have in the 60s and 70s. It's only if you're a local person living in Malaysia, you see that in front of you. But I have to tell you something, right? Among the young people I interact with, right? Increasingly, right? They are shutting themselves off for all the problems. They concentrate on their social media, which means that they only want to see things that reinforce their own views. So that's the reason why in Malaysia, right, there is the younger people are becoming more and more materialistic. They're not interested in social policy. They're not interested in contributing to the political system. They're not interested in what they're interested is, what can I buy from Temu and, all those online cheap stuff. They're actually not interested in politics.
I mean, I was quite young at the time. Many years ago, I was young, and even then, I didn't care about politics, right?
Yeah.
But people change, people mature.
I'm talking about the young people.
Correct, I
Right,
understand.
you know.
I understand. So it's an interesting point you raised because the so-called green wave was actually led by quite a young
Ah,
cohort, right?
no. The Green Wave was led by influencers who were supported by PAS, who went all these things. But the people who vote for the Green Wave, right, who voted for PAS, right, didn't know what they were voting for. They felt that it was an obligation to vote for PAS because PAS promised to make Malaysia more Islamic.
Okay, correct. So does that cohort make a U-turn this time around, or do they consolidate?
My argument is that they will consolidate. Because these young people, right, the moment you use the religious card, right, it covers up everything else, including corruption.
That's not very good.
No, that's why I say you better don't invite me anymore.
We have to talk more about this because conversation liberates minds, and liberated minds have
But
better.
how to say that this is only among the Banza crowd. The other 90% Malaysians don't think this way.
Yeah. So how do people position for this future then?
I think among the upper middle class and people from so-called educated families, I think a lot of them tell the children that if you can't make it in Malaysia, you have to seriously considering to move overseas.
But
In
then,
fact, a lot of them has actually done that already.
where do you go?
Oi, there's endless places you can run in Malaysia because somehow our private education system is still producing top people. Part of it is because we live in a multiracial society, so we're very flexible, and secondly, we're multilingual. So, for example, if you want to run, right, you just run next door. Singapore take all our top talents. If they don't take our top talents, you can go to China. No problem.
Where would you go in China?
Oh, there are all sorts of jobs. At one time, I was told, right, among the F&B managers, the people who manage F&B are roughly 40% are Malaysians. Because Malaysian can speak Mandarin, English, Bahasa, all sorts of, and they're very good at F&B stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, man. Until next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any parting shots?
Now, my parting shot is that young people, especially non-Malays, whether you like it or not, you have to get involved in politics because politics really affect your life chance. You may not do it for your own generation, but the future generation that comes after you.
Okay, on that point, I've got to disagree because, James, for every honest person I see that enter politics, 9.9 out of them, they get turned by the power, the status, the symbolism, and the money that's thrown at them almost daily. They change. They change. And nobody's incorruptible one.
No, I'm not talking about corruption.
Correct. But what I'm saying, if you ask them to enter politics,
Yeah.
they will not end up the same person they were when they first went in. That's my problem.
Yes, that is one way of looking at it. But the other way I look at it, right, at least they will bring some changes initially.
That's not very hopeful.
Before they turn the dark side like the Star Wars, right? Before they enter the cave, they will do good things. Look, to be fair, right, I would argue that this government, the Pakatan Harapan government, is a lot cleaner compared to the Barisan Nasional. How should I put this? I mean, Barisan Nasional no longer exists. I remember when I was much younger, had a full set of hair, when I was interviewing all these very high up people, some of the businessmen I interviewed told me openly during election time they carry suitcase of money.
I saw that myself as well. Yeah, I saw
That sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. So that to me,
No, it's gone underground, James. It's not as if it's disappeared.
it doesn't happen. I don't think today I can carry a suitcase of money and visit any of the ministers.
It's called cryptocurrency. I really saw in my own eyes a politician, Hilton Kuching, he was sitting there. A suitcase, $50,
Not only that,
They were queuing up from
the
outside.
standard jokes in the good old days, right, was that during election time, if you know election is coming up on Monday, polling day is on Monday, right? 2 weeks before that, right, you go to the bank, you cannot change $50 note already, all gone, or pick up yourself. I mean, that was the joke. And of course, we laugh about it, but there is some truth to that. I'm still very hopeful that Malaysia can get out of this grip. But whatever it is, right, we have to adopt a new political culture. But the first point you made in introductory remarks is absolutely true. Countries around us are running at an incredible pace. You look at Indonesia, you look at Vietnam. 20 years ago, we would laugh at these people. The Vietnamese are the one working in rough jobs that we don't want to do. The Indonesians are doing rough jobs. I think a lot of these people have never been to Jakarta recently. It's a complete change in place of Jakarta. They have a completely new political culture, totally, different from us. Ever since they became a member of G20, right? They're playing the big boys games already. So Malaysia is really behind. The one that we want to watch out for, right, is not the Vietnamese actually ahead of us now. The one we really have to watch out for, right, are the Thai, Cambodians, and Filipinos. We are still slightly ahead of them now, and if we don't keep our advantage over these three groups, right, if they overtake us, right, then I think we will be in big trouble.
So you said one of the things to be constructive is for the young people to get involved in politics. What's another one or two more?
There's none. Because politics in Malaysia decides your life chance. Everything in this country is politics. The school you go to is also a political issue because people say that the national school is not Malay territory. University, I don't have to say, is highly politicized. Getting a job, also highly politicized. People say, how can you say that? I say, yes, I can say that. Name me, the number of non-Malays appointed top of GOC 3. And right, the GOC are the commanding heights of the Malaysian economy. If you want to shake the Malaysian economy, it's not the government, it's the GOCs.
It is what it is, isn't it?
Yes, so we have to go.
Okay, man, thank you. Come here.
It's good to see you.
On that bombshell.